In today's video, we're going to continue on with our series covering all 31 NHL teams where we recap the 17-18 season and make a plan to look ahead to their 2018 offseason. Today's team we're discussing is the Colorado Avalanche, and that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today we're discussing the Colorado Avalanche and their 17-18 season and looking ahead to their 2018 offseason. Now, you could probably make the argument that the 17-18 season was a huge improvement for the Avalanche, and they were certainly one of the surprise teams of the league that improved drastically. Now, we saw some changes go down early in the year, and we saw some great improvements. So let's jump in and first recap their 17-18 season. Now, obviously, they got off to a pretty good start here. They finished with a 43-30-9 record for 95 points. Puts them in 4th position in the Central Division. They made the playoffs, which was a kind of a surprise. It came right down to the wire in the last day of the season with a win over the St. Louis Blues to get themselves into the playoffs. To go from last place last year to the playoffs this year was an absolutely tremendous improvement. Nobody's seen that coming. A lot of people predicted the Avalanche to be near the bottom again. Considering last offseason, there wasn't a whole lot of change to their roster or their coaching staff, so why would you really have thought that there would be a tremendous improvement? I mean, obviously, it's something that caught everybody by surprise, probably a lot of Avs fans as well. But the fact of the matter is it did happen, and this team really showed that it can be substantially better. Now, of course, early in the season, they finally executed the big Matt Duchene trade. Joe Sakic had been sitting on that for a long time, waiting for the right deal to come along, and they finally worked out a 3-way deal between the Ottawa Senators and the Nashville Predators. They picked up prospect and picks from the Senators, and they picked up young defenseman Samuel Girard from the Nashville Predators. I mean, obviously, that worked out quite well. He's going to be an excellent defenseman long-term, I think, for the Avalanche. So I think Joe Sakic did very, very well in the Matt Duchene trade. I mean, he was getting a lot of criticism for waiting and waiting and waiting, but you know what? It paid off. He did the right thing here, as much as it was frustrating for everybody involved and fans as well. He got a king's ransom for Duchene, and it certainly paid off here long-term. Now, even though the Avalanche had a first-round loss to the Nashville Predators, they still had nothing to be upset about this year, really. I mean, obviously, it sucks to lose in the playoffs, but at the same time, they had such great improvement. They have no reason but to hold their heads high and be proud of the improvements they made this year. Taking a look at some of the team statistics here, they had 255 goals forwards, put them 10th in the league, which was pretty solid. Goals against, they allowed 236 for 15th, so middle of the pack. The power play percentage was pretty respectable at 21.9, which was 8th best in the NHL. And their penalty killing was 4th best at 83.3. So special teams were pretty solid for these guys, and they actually scored at a high rate as well. The only real area amongst all those stats that they really kind of focus on a bit would be cutting down the goals against a little bit to kind of move them up the ranks a little bit. But being in the middle of the pack of a 31-team league really isn't terrible. But if they want to take the next step to move themselves forward to being a stronger playoff team and to get closer to being a contender, then that's going to be an area of focus moving forward. Now, another area of focus at things that did not go well last year was their face-offs. They were actually dead last in face-off wins as a team last season. They only won 44.2% of their face-offs, put them in 31st position. So that is certainly an area of focus for this team. They really need to work on getting better. Winning face-offs for next year. I mean, if you're always starting without the puck, whether you're in the offensive zone or the defensive zone or at center ice, it doesn't matter where you're at. If you're starting without the puck, that just makes your job that much more difficult, and that would probably actually help cut down the goals against as well, seeing that they're probably starting a lot of defensive zones, losing the draws, resulting in goals against. So really, if they could clean up their face-offs, that would probably go a long way to helping both of those team statistics. Now let's take a look at a few of the bright spots for the team this year, and then we'll look at a few things and other things on an individual basis that didn't go so well. For example, as you all know, Nathan MacKinnon had a phenomenal year, certainly in contention for the Art Ross and the Hart Trophy. I mean, this guy had a tremendous breakout season, really showed that he was worthy of that #1 overall pick a few years back. He really broke out strong, and really, if it wouldn't have been for being injured and missing some time, he probably would have had an awesome shot at winning the Art Ross Trophy as the league's top scorer. But he finished with 39 goals and 58 assists for 97 points. Tremendous year. On his line was fellow youngster Mikko Rantanen, which also had a breakout season. Rantanen put up 29 goals and 55 assists for 84 points. So those two, if they can keep them playing together and playing that well longer term, then that's going to create a real solid top line for this team moving forward. It gives them a lot of good, solid foundation to build around in the forward group. Obviously, their other main forward is Gabriel Landeskog, their team captain, who had a pretty solid year as well, putting up 25 goals and 37 assists. So those are obviously their top three forwards, and they all had pretty solid years. I thought rookie Alex Kerfoot also had a pretty solid year, putting up 19 goals. He was a pleasant surprise as well. And even though Tyson Barrie's name gets mentioned a lot in trade rumors, I thought he had a pretty solid season. I mean, he's not the absolute best defensively, but from an offensive perspective, Tyson Barrie is pretty solid, putting up 14 goals and 43 assists. Mind you, that was combined with a -14 plus-minus rating, but still, you could take the good with the bad. But overall, like I said, there was a lot of this team play, but Barrie, from an offensive standpoint, had a fantastic season, I thought. Now, as far as things that didn't go so well, obviously, you could take a look at a few things. I thought Tyson Jost's rookie year didn't go quite as well as I thought it would. I thought he'd be a little bit closer to the Calder Trophy candidates. I mean, obviously, I wasn't sure that he would necessarily be a nominee or a winner of that trophy, but I really thought Tyson Jost would have a more solid rookie year, but he finished with just 22 points, so we certainly look for him to continue developing and continue improving, and hopefully he can become the top six forward, like the consistent top six forward that puts up more points on a regular basis to really help this team move forward. Obviously, the experiment with Nail Yakupov might have come to an end. He was playing pretty well with Matt Duchene early in the year before Duchene got moved, but Yakupov only finished with 16 points in 58 games. Hard to say if he returns or not, but that experiment didn't really go all that well. And honestly, for what he's getting paid, I don't think the Avalanche are getting enough out of defenseman Erik Johnson. I mean, he's got 5 more years at $6 million per year, and he gave them 25 points this year. I know he was obviously a #1 draft pick a while back, and he's got a pretty long-term contract. You know, like I said, 5 years, $6 million. So moving him might be difficult, but for what he's getting paid, I just don't think he's providing enough in return to justify the contract, in my opinion. Now let's take a look at their offseason plans here. We're going to look at their contracts, UFAs, RFAs, and see what we should expect from this team moving forward to prepare for next year, to see if they can obviously improve upon the fantastic improvement from last year and take it a step further. Now for UFAs, they don't have a lot, but they do have Blake Comeau and Jonathan Bernier. And to be completely honest, I'm doubtful that either of these guys return. I'm almost certain Jonathan Bernier won't. I mean, they already have Varlamov under contract, and they've already brought in and signed Pavel Francouz, goaltender from the Czech Republic, to a 1-year deal. Francouz had been playing in the KHL. He's represented the Czech Republic at numerous tournaments and looked really, really solid. So I think it's pretty certain that Francouz is going to be on the goalie tandem with the Avalanche next year. So I think that's probably safe to say that Bernier is the odd man out, where he does not have a contract. Now the other UFA, Blake Comeau, it is possible he returns. Comeau is 32 years old now, putting up 12, 13 goals a year. So he could potentially be a bottom 6 guy, but I think he's a player that they probably could do without. So it's debatable, in my opinion, if he returns. Maybe if the money's right, but they could also give the roster spot to a younger player to let them develop as well. Now they do have some RFAs that are interesting to keep your eye on. Matt Nieto is one. Obviously, another one's Nail Yakupov. Patrick Nemeth is another. I think Nemeth definitely gets signed. Nieto likely gets signed. He was a pretty good pickup. Played pretty decent. So I think Nieto can certainly serve a bottom 6 role for sure. So I'd say he likely does get qualified and re-sign. Yakupov, it's debatable, really. I mean, they could trade his rights for something. I'm not sure what they'd get for him. But, I mean, Yakupov has bounced around now to a few teams, and he's just not cutting it. I think his time in the NHL is pretty much up. I know it was speculated he may return to the KHL after this year as well. So it's hard to say, but I think the experiment with Nail Yakupov is coming to an end. Now, the part that's really interesting to me, though, is they have a ton of players that are eligible for contract extensions. Now, I don't think too many of these guys are going to get done. A lot of them are probably going to be looked at during the season or next offseason. But if they don't decide to keep some of these guys, then they're going to have a slew of free agents next year. So you know that the ones that they're interested in keeping, they'll start negotiations with. But just to give you an example here, Varlamov is eligible for an extension. He'll be UFA after this coming year. Same with Gabriel Bourque and Colin Wilson. You've also got Kerfoot, JT Compher, and Zadorov, and Andrighetto. They're all eligible for extensions. Majority of those guys are RFAs. So there's a lot of them that really you could probably kind of wait and see, so you have a better idea what the player is. It could be in the player's best interest to wait as well. But there's certainly a lot of guys that they could consider negotiating extensions with this summer. I don't think too many of them will get done, but I can see a couple of them being a little bit more prominent. I'm not sure. I guess time will tell if they're going to move forward here with Varlamov or if they're going to try to replace him in goal. Obviously, you know, his numbers have been decent, but they could probably use an upgrade there to really, in order for them to take the next step longer term to be any chance of being a contender. Now, they have some excellent defensive prospects on the way. They may not be in the lineup next year. They have Cale Makar, who was drafted high in the first round before, but he's going to be another year or two away. He's still playing college hockey. Connor Timmins is another solid defensive prospect who played for Team Canada at the World Juniors. Spent some time playing with Makar a little bit as well. It's possible those two could actually possibly end up being in tandem one day, but they have Timmins and Makar on the way. Probably two of their brightest prospects. So between what they have now and those two coming, they do have a pretty solid blue line in the works for the future here. So as far as what they need to do this season, obviously they have a ton of contracts that they need to decide on. They have a lot of guys who either need signed or they need to decide if they're going to offer extensions this year. They could probably benefit for some more secondary scoring in the bottom six. So with a couple of their contracts coming up, they could potentially look to the free agent market to maybe make a trade or two to kind of round out that bottom six a little bit. I think it could use a few upgrades myself. They also need to continue working with their young players who need to continue to develop, like a Tyson Jost. I think he can develop into a much better player longer term. So obviously, we'll see how far he can take it next year. But the other thing with the Avalanche is I think they really need to decide long-term on their goalie plans. Now, they may very well ride this out, see how Pavel Francouz works out as well. I mean, if he's still young enough that he could be their goalie for the immediate future if things really work out. And maybe after this year, maybe we might see Varlamov move on and Francouz take over the net. It's a little early to say that because we haven't seen Francouz in an Avalanche uniform as of right now in the NHL. But if he plays well, it's certainly something to keep in mind because Varlamov is entering the last year of his deal. They need to decide if they're going to re-up him longer term and stay that course or if they're going to go in a new direction for their goaltending. I think that's a question that they kind of need to get a better handle on this year so they can plan ahead because obviously, you know, that's such an important position. They need to figure out what their plans are there long term, but they're probably to a degree going to take a wait and see approach with how well Francouz works out once he gets some NHL action under his belt. But outside of that, I don't see them doing too much. I mean, they could add on the back end, but I wouldn't do anything long term because they've got a lot of young prospects coming and they have some young players in the lineup now. So with between what's already there and what's coming, that is a very promising looking defense core for the future. So I wouldn't sign any veterans to too much for a long term. I mean, if the right veteran came along, if they were able to grab a John Carlson or something, you can't pass that up. Otherwise, I would probably tinker with some depth moves between the bottom six. Forwards and, you know, the second, third pair defense to see if they can make some upgrades there. But I don't expect anything too big or flashy out of the Avalanche this season unless they decide that some of these guys that are eligible for extensions are guys they want to move on from. We may see some deals maybe at the draft or throughout the season. Now, the Avalanche have the number 16 pick in this year's NHL entry draft. So even at number 16, they should be able to get themselves a pretty solid player, whether it be a forward or potentially a defenseman. You know, if they're looking at forwards, we might see guys like Joe Velino, for example, center from the Quebec Major Junior League, might be available. You might get a defenseman like a Rasmus Sandin, who's a really solid two-way defender from the OHL. I mean, there's all kinds of solid prospects. So even at 16, they're going to get a pretty solid player. Probably going to be a year or two away from joining the lineup, whoever they take, more than likely. But it's still somebody to add to their prospect cupboard and brighten the future of this team moving forward. So leave some comments down below. What do you expect from the Avalanche during this offseason? Do you think we'll see many moves out of this team? Like, I think they have a lot of question marks, and they're a very interesting team to watch because of the number of contracts that are up between this year and next. So there could be significant turnover, but I guess we'll see how they feel about the roster now and what they're able to add to it. Now, if you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button as well. I'd really appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.